There are two major stories for today's episode. Blizzard are considering removing the Mythic Plus timer, and Ian, the game director, just talked about, well, the Addons Arm Race in raiding and basically stripping stuff away from add-ons, which is a hell of a lot. There's more as well, but I didn't expect to close off 2025 with Blizzard actually engaging in some of World of Warcraft's largest player sticking points. And if Too Many Subs is one of yours, definitely check out today's sponsor. We're going to help you save money real fast. They're called Rocket Money, and they tackle your subscriptions head on. And, well, if I'm anything to go by, those really can pile up. So Rocket Money is a personal finance tool that helps you lower your bills, stay on top of your subscriptions, and manage your money. And you can get started for free today at rocketmoney.com/Bellular Warcraft. Now let's talk subscriptions. They're dastardly, they stack up, and what happens here is Rocket Money will securely and safely identify the recurring charges for you, and then you can cancel them in just a few taps. And they've put the work in to make that just a smooth, fast experience. It takes no time, so if it's a chore that you've been putting off, well, now's the time to do that. Rocket Money do lots more too, like helping you with bill negotiation. You simply upload your bill and they'll be able to help. And you can do damn well there. As an example, my internet went off its contract price. It went way up, and I was able to negotiate a move from 550 to 1,100, right? So that's way faster for half the monthly cost, which was crazy. And for some fun stats on the sub front, they've cancelled over $500 million of subscriptions, and they've helped the customers save up to $740 a year when they're using all the app's premium features. Rocket Money has other great tools to help you budget as well, so if you want to spend less and save more, you can join the over 5 million Rocket Money members today using rocketmoney.com/Bellular Warcraft. Just click that link down below. You can start for free and you get more features with premium, and that's rocketmoney.com/Bellular Warcraft. First up then, Mythic Dungeons and what's going on. Of course, they've recently made changes, right, with crests and all of that, and there have been balance changes, which I'll talk about later. But the main thing is they've sent out a survey, and it asks people how they would feel about a death counter instead of a timer. Now, whenever you look at this, your mind immediately thinks, oh my god, there would be big differences, there would be humongous downsides. But the more you think, the more you can see ways in which it would work. Without a timer, you could just take your time, right? And yes, people will rush to the immediate worst case of suddenly people waiting for heroism on every pull, but that's really extreme, and even without a timer, there still is a timer. It's the fourth dimension, time, and you just wanting more loot per hour, so I actually think that criticism is overblown. For most people, I think it wouldn't mean much more than just waiting for the odd cooldown here or there if a pack is particularly challenging, and most people would probably just have a more relaxing way to play, right? Slow and steady, not rushing, maybe just pulling one pack at a time, safely, maybe CCing dangerous mobs, or waiting for a patrol instead of risking a wipe. In many ways, that's more aligned with what you would consider to be a more traditional MMO dungeoning experience. If you need to make a change to your plan, you would have time to do that. To change a strategy, you would have time to do that. Unless you're pushing the very highest of keys, you'd probably feel safer taking non-meta comps because, well, speed isn't as important. I mean, hell, imagine a World of Warcraft dungeon experience where you could actually take a 5-minute break if somebody in the group needs it, so that you don't feel like the second you sign up to a Mythic Plus group, you are locked to your computer and suddenly you've got to explain to family members and people in the house that it's really important that under no circumstances you move from your chair. There are tons of positives, right? I think that's pretty obvious, but there are some downsides as well. Like, yeah, it would make deaths way more scary than they are now. Either Blizzard starts with a limit that's really high, or people just end up feeling terrified of making mistakes. Also, death is way more individual, right? I mean, if somebody messes up the rotation and just does a bit less damage in a mob pack, okay, you'll lose seconds, but it's really hard to work out just how much you've actually cost the group. But if somebody walks into a mechanic and you lose one of your limited lives, everyone's going to see that. And that means that Johnny Hunter's 10 deaths will look even worse than the other DPS player's 4 or 5, even if he is an absolute pumper in the DPS meters. But then there's another point. This is actually the deeper problem in my view. A tank death is actually 5 deaths, because if the tank dies, well, chances are the rest of you are all going to die as well. Right now, that loses over a minute of time plus the run back. And because of that, changing the death timer would actually put more pressure on the shoulders of tanks and healers, because it's all about deaths, the things that they care about. and relatively, that would mean less responsibility for DPS deaths. And with no timer, DPS is less important, so they would have nothing to worry about except the mechanics. A mistake for them is just one death, but if the tank messes up, well, that's basically 5 deaths, and it's kind of similar for the healer, because the whole group will go down. Now, I say that, but again, even as a DPS, knowing that your deaths could be directly responsible for messing up a run, like that is still pretty stressful, especially for newer people or lower skilled players. The question though is, would it be more stressful or less stressful than what the timer gives us now? And that's where I realized something. Playstyle. Because if you had a death timer, but you still played Mythic Plus dungeons as you do today, that would be absolute sheer hell. But if your gameplay style and the expectations of your group were more slow and steady, using CCs and stuff, I mean, yeah, death would matter, but you'd feel far more of a sense of control over death than you sort of would with the timer, because the whole point of the timer is you don't control the timer. All that you can do is just go faster and faster and faster and keep on trying to push, which stresses a lot of people out by default. So, what are Blizzard going to do? We don't exactly know, but that they're doing surveys, I think actually means it's serious, because there's people at the other end of that survey at Blizzard who are specifically sampling different sets of players to find out what people actually like. And just last week, I mean, we talked about future classes and stuff, again, via another Blizzard survey. And it just makes me think, hang on a second, are Blizzard actually trying to check in with their players way more than they have before? The example I used in that video is the Evoker, where, look, if you like the Evoker fantasy and the gameplay, that's a great thing. But the Evoker, I think it's fair to say, was not a massive, very, very hype sort of addition to the game that sold loads of copies in the same way that maybe a Demon Hunter could be. So that Blizzard were doing market testing and research for different class ideas kind of tells me that they actually have a way more serious data operation these days, and they want to know what people actually think. So I think that's why this has happened. Still, even if they were going to do a season-wide test of this, that would be pretty risky, and there's still some low-hanging fruit, right? I mean, Blizzard have already taken some free wins in the table with the crest changes. I think the next one to do absolutely is key depletion, because it's just goddamn sadistic. Ian Hazakozdas, game director, just told PC Gamer that they've had enough of add-ons ruining their raids. He did use more diplomatic language, though. Here's the direct quote. "We likely will want to start clawing back some functionality," and in full context of the interview, this is him talking about add-ons doing the fun parts of a fight for you. Specifically, the difference in a fight for somebody who does have add-ons and does not have add-ons. And it's not really about, oh, who's the most responsible teammate, who's always going to make sure they have the lowest chance of failure. It's actually a far more fundamental game design thing. So most players might think that a fight is really boring because they just do DPS until their weak aura tells them that they've got something to do, and then they do that thing. They may not even understand what that thing does, the broader picture of their actions. All they know is the raid weak auras tells them to do a thing whenever it flashes, so they just do that. But then the people who don't have the weak auras, well, maybe they're thinking about the fight, paying attention to it, and to them, the fight isn't boring. It's just right, because they're engaging with the mechanics. Then the designers have got a real problem, because maybe they want to make the next fight more complicated so that that first group of more add-on heavy people are happy and they have a really fun time. But then there's a problem. The people who don't have DBM, weak auras, and all of those things, well, they just end up feeling really overwhelmed. And it's also not our first rodeo. Private auras were an attempt to solve this problem, and to be honest, they did cock it up quite a bit during Dragonflight, although largely they actually got it pretty good with the Neru bar tier. Any clawing back of functionality here, though, needs to happen early in PTR, so we've basically got time to test. I really hope they take that bit seriously. Now, thankfully, Ian did temper his own statement. He added this to it as well, and again, I'm just going to quote the man. "As long as we can make sure our baseline game experience is offering players the information they need to have an engaging, elegant time." And I love his use of the word elegant there, and a lot of the context is Blizzard talking about some of those raid mechanics being communicated via in-game things. Of course, that could be in-game UI, that could be stuff just within the world, you know, using your eyes, looking at the boss room. Though there is, of course, one big example, and that is the fight of Ovanax, and the interviewer actually brought that up. So that fight had a weak aura that auto-assigned marked players to egg clusters, and then another one that auto-assigned available kicks to the different worms, which basically meant that the group thinking and coordination was just sort of handled. So a group who was not using that, well, they would have their brains and their voice chat be a little bit overloaded. Now, it's not to say that if you had those weak auras on, the fight was suddenly really simple. Like, no, the fight was actually designed to be hard, even with those add-ons, but well, to some people, it was basically impossible without. Now, I think about my own raid team, we're maybe 10, 11, 12 people, maybe 13. And some of the group coordination can be a little bit easier when you've got less people. One thing that absolutely gave me a new perspective in the game, just because I hadn't experienced it, was Preach talking about returning to Season 1 of this expansion. I believe he was doing heroic raids, and of course heroic is flex, and I think he was doing it with a pretty big raid size. And just between like room for mechanics, visual noise, all of that stuff, it was basically a massive clusterfuck. Now, from my perspective, I've been having a great time with 10, 11, 12, 13 players, right? Smaller raid sizes. But it does seem that with the larger raid sizes, it actually does end up being a problem. And it's easy to pigeonhole this discussion into just being the most advanced players in the game, where the big guilds like, Liquid and Echo, they have got people on their team whose job it is to make the most amazing tailor-made weak auras to solve problems in the race. It's not exactly that, though. I think for most people, the problem is not possible versus impossible. It is boring versus not boring. Because if the weak auras are handling all the thinking and a hell of a lot of actually looking at the video game, then you're playing the UI. Maybe it feels a little bit like playing a video game on the very easy mode and just button mashing to the end, versus playing it on a harder difficulty that you'll end up finding just a better sense of accomplishment from. Except that here it is obviously way more complicated, especially because these fights have got to be played by players with a stock UI and players with loads of add-ons. And there's just also the fact that players will use whatever advantages they've got, because World of Warcraft is a gear and achievement-driven game, which ultimately means it's kind of up to Blizzard to make sure that we don't ruin our own fun in a weird way. Next, a whole load of tangible things. The new patch is out and we actually got surprise buffs. The week before launch, everyone was worried that Cersei Circlet would just be way too weak. For a catch-up item that was intended for Season 2, it was actually weaker than Mythic Rings from the current season. But of course, was is the operative word there. The night before it went up, Blizzard announced a change. Instead of ending at item level 639, like it is in the PTR, it's going to start at item level 639, and it will level all the way up to 658. It's a pretty damn massive item level, and by Blizzard's estimate, it'll be competitive with Season 2 heroic gear. So, yeah, make sure to get that, but thankfully it really isn't much of a grind at all, and there is catch-up for your alts. Now, Blizz also said they'll be watching out for any specific gems that they need to buff or nerf, which basically means they don't want a repeat of the Onyx Amulet situation, but their overall goal is to make sure that if you're wearing this, it is a very strong thing that you'll only be replacing perhaps later into the next season. Now, that's not all the buffs that happened. Classes also got buffed as a last-minute announcement. Here's what's went on there. Holy DKs, very good. You've got a very nice buff, mostly to your single target. The same goes for Havoc Demon Hunter. Devastation Evokers get a little 4% buff to everything, and then Marksmanship gets a buff to their trick shots and some of the Dark Ranger bits. Affliction Warlock then is getting some decent buffs across various talents, and for the healers, Holy Paladin does get some minor specific buffs, but I think one of the really big ones is going to be for the Holy Priest, because you guys just get 15% to Flash Heal and Holy Fire, and then Resto Sham gets an oddly specific mana cost reduction to their Surging Totem. Now look, it's not the biggest wave of changes. This is really not a patch that is about class changes. That's really going to be something for patch 11.1, but at the very least, this is Blizzard targeting some of the underperformers. But in a way, that's not the only class changes that have happened. We've talked a lot about Mythic Dungeons on this channel in this video, and another thing has happened. Certain magical tankbusters and non-magic dispels got nerfed in 6 of the 8 dungeons, and mostly by about 10% to 25%, which again, when you add on layers of multiplicative scaling, is just going to be a shitload of a nerf. Now, this is specifically to open up different group comps. Basically, this means that classes that don't have poison or curse dispels will be able to get more invites to higher keys, assuming that the knowledge trickles down into people who are running pugs. So, pretty good news, I'd say. Now, in reward news, we've actually got the culmination of a story that's been bubbling up for quite a while, the Fell Cycle. It has finally been found, and well, the Fell Cycle is called Incognitro, the indecipherable fell cycle, and it was one of those things added in the anniversary patch that has just been a big secret hunt. And if you know about the WoW secret finding community, they're absolutely crazy and they do pretty magical things. Now, the entire puzzle is actually not done just yet. Only 9 out of the 12 pylons are solved, but basically it's enough to actually go and get them out. So you can just follow this absolutely gigantic list of steps across Azeroth, and when you do, you'll get a pretty cool looking mount. There is one frustrating bit. You will need to win a certain pet battle, and with certain pets from a list. So yeah, it's that, and then a whole bunch of insanely specific steps. Then next, I have amazing news. We can all chip in and get a lovely Winter's Veil gift for Blizzard. If you are one of the people who have not yet purchased The War Within, it's 30% off, but that combos with another thing. The new Diablo expansion, Vessel of Hatred, is 25% off, and Blizzard have put together a promotion. If you own both the WoW and D4 expansions, you'll get this pretty damn massive list of Diablo cosmetics for WoW. Now, these are almost all unavailable items from the D4 pre-order and previous crossover events, things like the Belial Soulstone pet, the Amalgam of Rage mount, stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, come on, cosmetics sell, you know how it goes. There's other sales as well, like a 30% one on game sales and 50% off a bunch of the cosmetics. So that's the news. But do you know what actually is newsworthy? That the Siren Isle lore is as damn good as it is. Seriously, it goes hard. It sets up loads of lore stuff about where we're going next. So if you skipped reading those stone tablets and all those long lost diaries, well, check out this video next because we're going to break down the whole thing together.